Malo elele, everyone, to another episode of the Polynesian Eyes podcast here at the Digital Kava Session Central. Tuafale here from South Central Texas for a few more episodes before we relocate our headquarters to the entertainment capital of the world, Las Vegas.
Oh yeah, we're to
And
Sin City. Sin City,
yes,
I
Sin
bet.
City. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And we also have Mr. Aotearoa joining us from South Auckland. How you doing,
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Aotearoa?
Tua, I can't complain, man. Weather is beautiful today in New Zealand, especially Auckland, Manurewa, where I'm at. Today was beautiful. Yesterday was beautiful weather. Friday was rain all day, even Thursday. So I can't complain, Tua. It's good to be here.
Awesome. And we're very excited today and appreciate this guest for joining us. Pakilau Aotearoa Manase Lua. So going to hand over the time for him introduce himself to the podcast here.
Thank you guys. Got a big hufang at Malu Fonua. Yeah, my name is Pakilau Aotearoa Manase Lua. I'm a Matapure, Kava or Maafu. Maafu is the noble, hereditary noble of Vaini and Tokomololo in the Kingdom of Tonga. I live here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Obviously, my title has the esteem of holding the New Zealand indigenous name, Aotearoa. I live in Flatbush, South Auckland, with my wife and 4 children, 3 adult children, and 1 teenager. So it's really great to be on your platform, guys, just to share a little bit about what's going on here in Aotearoa and possibly around the region. Yeah, but really good to be here.
Yeah, in our quick huddle just before the podcast, true to every Kava session, right? You show up and you see who's there, and then the conversation goes where the conversation goes. So in our quick huddle for like 2-3 minutes before jumping on the recording here, that's kind of the context we gave to Manase. And first, I have my first question to bring up here because growing up in Tonga, when the Pakilau Middle School first came up, right, for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I have no idea of the meaning or the name behind it, but I've seen it pop up a handful of times mentioned, and then I see it in your name. What is the origin? There's probably a story and a history behind the name of Pakilau. So I thought that would be a great way to start, Manase, and kind of educate our viewers and listeners on that history.
It's a good question, and I get asked it quite a bit, especially from our Samoan family, because Pakilau sounds, a little bit. It's not a name you hear very often, apart from in Vaini. So it's very distinct to Vaini. Go Vai. It's a stream in Vaini. It's called Pakilau. The little area. I don't know if you remember, if you come through Beulah College, past Beulah College, that from Beulah College to where the cemetery is, that whole area is called Pakilau. And the stream that it's named after, there's a bit of history to the stream. Taufa'ahau Tupou I, whose mother was from Vaini, the daughter of Maafu, Malu Taufa, he used to bathe in that stream. Remember, in Vaini, there are always stories associated with chiefs of the families of the time. And one of the versions, obviously there's multiple versions, is that when the paki means to pluck leaves or pluck halau, and you throw it into the water, and if it flows out, that means it's good to bathe in because the fresh water is flowing out from the rocks. And if it flows back, that means the tide's coming in, and so it's salty and probably not the best time to swim. That's the original meaning of the name Pakilau, plucking the leaves and throwing it onto the getahi.
Okay.
And if it flows out. So that's one meaning. Yeah, there are others.
Okay. So it's a vai that comes out of the rocks, typically going out into, because that's part of the lagoon, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Goes out into the lagoon. So that's an interesting little bit of knowledge, right? Because it's coming from underground, it's fresh water. And if the tide is going out, then the fresh water is dominant, you're saying, then the leaf would go out, which would make sense. Okay, the water is going to be fresh water, but if it comes back in, that means the tide's coming in, so it won't be fresh water; it'll be salty.
Yeah. And some of Let's say that the water has healing qualities. So there's a story when Taufa'ahau was younger, he would go and swim there, and it would be soothing on his skin. Not a lot of people know this, but Taufa'ahau, Tupou the first, had a Samoan tattoo. He had the full bear. I have the
Mm,
bear. Well, I have a full bear, and when you
mm.
swim, it's cooling on your skin, and it has
Mm,
properties. So that's another story behind the stream. So it has that pedigree of being associated with Tupou the first, and also his grandfather Maafu Malotaufa, the great 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 grandfather of the Maafu now.
very interesting.
Mm,
I mean, I
mm,
would love. I think if selfishly, I want to pull on the Taufa'ahau string quite a bit because I think that is a individual that we always hear the very broad stories of
Mm,
Taufa'ahau because he is such a key figure.
mm,
Um, but you've touched on a couple key areas that I think are very relevant to our day, like you mentioned, Tapea,
mm,
right?
mm.
There's been some controversy last few months about
Tongan
tattoos
Malu.
and the
Yeah.
Tongan Malu.
mm,
How is it that you have what we'll accept that phrase Samoan or Ha'amoa Pe'a?
mm,
We have our own views on it, but why is it that you
mm,
have what would be considered, or at least most people would consider as a Ha'amoa culture
mm. Yeah,
um, in you and in that?
yeah, that's a very good question. I don't have the tāwaka, which is our Tongan tatau. I have the full Malofie, the Samoan one. That's to honor my connection back to Samoa, to Sava'i, to my Safotu Lafai clan on my dad's side, and to Upolu Safata on Amalele's side. So I have both, but they're very, very old connections. These are going back 6, 7 generations back. So it's a way for me to connect back as a kafa of Maafu. Maafu comes from the Tuikana line, which has links to Safata through the Samoan line of Tohuia. Tosuia Limapo is the Samoan name, the
Mm,
Tora Vamalele. So the Maafu has a strong connection back to Samoa through that line. And that's what I'm honoring. It's not the Tongan side, it's the Samoan side. So I have a full Langi Malo fear, the Samoan one. Went through the whole process in the Samoan way. We did a ava. They did a full blessing for me at the end,
mhm.
called a Samanga. So yeah, the full shebang. We went through the whole process in the Samoan way. And for me, I've grown up with Samoans. I'm very close with them. I know the Matai well. I associate with a lot of the Matai here in Natula Valley. And yeah, it's just my way of honoring my connections back to Samoa.
Very
Nice.
interesting. Any thoughts or questions on that, Mr. Aotearoa?
I guess my question would be, what are your thoughts with I think because there was that, like, especially in social media and the young ones with the Tongan Malu, and I guess it was a big uproar regarding that because Ha'amoa are thinking that it's just for them, but the oldest tattoo kit was found in Tonga, and we have a long history of even the women, particularly from what I've seen in Vava'u, having da too, and and just that we are a proponent of Polynesia being a nation, and that's why it was everybody's. But there's been a quick spill on the Tongan Malu just as of recent that I'm thinking of. And I just wanted to get your thoughts just regarding that point of view. That's kind of been popular topic against many
Mm.
of the youth.
Yeah, I've been aware of the controversy around that, and
Mm,
I can understand why some people saw that as a very provocative thing to say that there's a Tongan malu. I think it's the terminology of using the malu. The
Mhm,
tātātau, we got be at Polynesia. We had the
mm,
tātātau from where everybody pretty much understands it. But I think um, where the controversy became a thing was it almost like the Tongans said the concept of holding a malu, that we had a malu, and like, I'm not sure because none of us were there at the time, and when our people wore the tatau, but definitely we all had the tatau. But I think it's more the specifics around what it was that was being gifted on her body. The patterns also were not the traditional Malu patterns. So I can understand where there would have been outrage from, particularly the strong traditionalist Samoans around that. But I've got to, give it to anyone who has the bravery to go through the procedure, because I've gone through it. So for me, it's okay to criticize and to challenge if you've gone through it. If you've actually had that pain, hours of torture, really, and then it has then some meaning. Or if you're from that family that have been gifted the art of the tākatau, that has more bearing. But if it's just noise or to provoke dissension between our communities, I don't think that's right. And I think a lot of that was some bad energy, very negative energy that it's not helpful.
Not 100%. And I think, that's one of the big drivers for us to have this podcast, right? Because we live in a day and age where everything is instant, and it's no longer about being thoughtful. And I suffer from this. I mean, I grew up in Tonga. I've been in the United States now since 2003. And no, actually 2001. And it's amazing how your environment changes you without you even knowing it. Right. And all of a sudden, because of the advancements in technology and ease, we're so quick to pass judgment and assume that the judgment that you make is a just and final judgment. And I think there's a lot of value in just sitting down, having conversations, discussing these things, because I've learned a lot. I mean, even on this podcast, even in just doing this podcast alone, I am blown away into how much information, how much knowledge I've been able to have access to. And that's to my perception that Kava is a critical part of our culture for a reason. And that Kava was one of the forums that which ideas were shared, decisions were discussed, potential conflicts were resolved before they became something big. And so it's really important to have these kind of forums, especially when we have, social media where it's a 15, 20-second clip and that's all you get. And then you got to give a whole, life story about why something is good or bad. So it's really important to have these discussions. And from your perspective, the Polynesian idea of tattoos was pretty much throughout Polynesia. I think that's a pretty safe place to start from. What are your thoughts on a Polynesian nation or empire or any type of structure behind that? Me and Mr. Aotearoa even have differing ideas as to what level of detail, even stuff like written language, even with other people we spoke about. Some of the people we've spoken to is, it wasn't really structured. It was just, over there, and we would visit every once in a while. What's kind of your perspective on that? As to, are you a proponent? If you are, if you aren't, what was kind of like the relationship or structure of this empire or nation from your thoughts?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of the commentary around that, and I've heard a lot of your speakers who've come on your podcast, particularly my cultural mentor, Dr. Shasi Ilayu. His views of that, and he's pretty much the foremost academic around this area, and I agree with his views. Not all of them. He and I differ on one or two things, but like everybody, we're all entitled to our opinions. So for me, this is again a very polarizing thing, because sadly I see a lot of conversations going down the side. Tonga ruled this, and then Tui Manua this, and Tui Tonga that, missing the point. At the end of the day, we had tangata upolu, tangata Savai, we had Tonga Tapu, people from New Fo'o. We weren't seen as this big national thing that these countries that are basically under a Western system, we've been sort of forced to have these identities. Before it was quite, in my view anyway, quite liquid. It was very organic. We we had chiefs, we had chiefdoms. One of them was the Tonga, of course, who at one stage influenced and dominated a certain region, and so they intermarry. Families of those unions would then have children that hold certain rank and certain influence and different. So it makes sense that you will have families who will use that and try and raise their influence. So
Mm.
to me, it's just a natural part of human history
Mm.
that certain elements will assert their rights. It's a very Samoans call it whātau, where the tula whare, the matapule will stand up and one will. It's a fantastic theatre. The battle of words. One will elevate their pedigree over the other one and connection to this and that. And that's the wonderful thing about our history. I think it's very organic. It's a living history. It's not something set in stone like our the books that we hear, because it's written by the conquerors, Western history, and it doesn't leave any room for any other views. And sadly I see this here in Aotearoa with Māori. So much rich history here is lost because all we're taught at our schools is what the Western system wants us to hear. And it's the same with our history. I think we've got to be open to what you guys are doing. This is history in terms of making sure you create a platform for people to come on and talk and share. Kava is the perfect platform to share in a peaceful way where you're not trying to dominate, because domination is a very Western imperial thing. We lived in union most of the time with our environment and with each other. And so we're losing that familial connection as a Moana family. I believe with all this arguing about this and that. I mean, unless you're from the Tui Manua family or the Tui Tonga family, why are you arguing? It's not your family. Just leave it. And so for me, it's more about, well, let's argue about the things that are useful. Why isn't Tonga lifting its standards in this? Why aren't we using the energy that propelled us to colonize every inhabitable island in the Pacific to better ourselves now? That's more useful. That's just my view.
No, 100%. And it's something that's really important. And I think this is why there's been a huge rise in what's typically called the long forum, right? For multiple generations, probably 3 generations now, it's been the short forum, and it's gotten short, much more short with social media, right? Where now you get your information in 15 to 20 seconds. Snippets, right? And that's what all the news, all the politicians, that's what they all know, that you could give a 1-hour speech, but everybody's only going to hear like 15 seconds, and you got to make that 15 seconds count. That has value because it gives speed and it catches the eye, right? But I believe like the generation now, we've been bombarded with that, and now we're kind of seeing, when you only see 5 seconds, you really don't understand the context or the history. So that's why I think there's a big overcorrection now, where everyone's like, no, I do want to sit down and listen to someone talk for an hour or 3 hours, because I get to hear and understand these ideas over time, right? And a weak idea, have you noticed that whenever, I don't want to say every snippet's a lie, but typically when someone wants to tell you something that's not a strong idea, it's not a solid idea, they want to tell it to you quickly and then move on.
Yeah.
Right? They want to plant that little seed and then say, oh, we got to move on to the next topic. In the Kava sessions, it goes on for hours and hours. And if you bring up, we say this quite a bit, we like the ideas to do the fighting, right? Yeah. We're past physical kicking and throwing and all that stuff. Throw your idea in there. Let your idea do the fighting. And it's really important. And it's a very powerful thing. And I think this is why certain political and social structures were so stable, because when you let the ideas fight, when a bad idea dies, you don't act out the bad idea, right? This is why it's important to have conversation. This is why we're social animals. That's why we're giving this mental capacity, is when our ideas fight and argue, then we can move on. No one has to be physically hurt. There's no economic loss. But when you just jump quickly to the let's kick and throw and damage, the house, the car and stuff, that moves progress backwards. And that was to me one of the things I kind of learned relatively young, observing some of the elder guys. Because when you're growing up in Tonga, at first I was like, dude, these OGs, they're just wasting time sitting there, right? For hours, like 2 hours before church, 3 hours after church, right? Every Sunday and then every evening. But as I've gotten older, it's like, no, there's a lot of value in counsel, right? They're sitting down, discussing important things. You're elevating your mind. Now, granted, you could go to certain Faikava that's not uplifting,
Yeah.
right? But we're talking about where you're going to people who are mentors, like you mentioned. Siaoshi Ilayu is a mentor. You're surrounding yourself with people with experience, people with knowledge, and more importantly, have interest in you being successful.
Yeah.
And that goes a very long way. That's kind of like my initial thoughts there. Mr. Aotearoa, what are your thoughts on just kind of like the progression of the
Oh,
Kava culture?
yeah, you kind of touched on it too. Like, with my like, there's a Faikava etiquette too. When you go to a karapu, Faikava karapu stuff, you can get conversations, but that's a good, like, you're having a good time. People are using kind of, just kind of more, let's just say, male towards language and stuff, but you can get some good conversations. But when you have a Faikava with a Faifekau at his house, your conversations there tend to be a little bit more, let's just say, what's going on in your area, what's going on with the church, what's going on with society, the Tongan community, and that's kind of the stuff I've learned. And then there's another certain Tongan etiquette or Faikava etiquette too. When you Faikava at a church hall,
Mhm.
it's more of you wear a tupenu at least when you kind of enter. You don't just wear, like, kind of whatever clothes where you're coming into a kalapu or whatever that you can do. But that's the thing that I don't think many people know. Some youth think, or people, let's just say, who are not familiar with the Faikava purpose, tend to think it's like some form of just our or like an alcohol use. It's just a whatever thing. But depending on what environment of a Faikava you tend to go to, the conversations also alter and depends on what you're most likely gonna converse in most of the time. That's just my experience. I don't know, Pakilau, if you had anything, what your experience is, depending on what kind of Faikava groups you kind of go around.
Yeah, I during COVID, during the lockdowns, you couldn't go anywhere and you couldn't go to
Mm,
the Faikava.
mm,
So we formed our own online cover club. It started off pretty sad, guys on the screen drinking your own cover and shooting the breeze, but then it grew. It blew up. At one stage, we had like 60 people online,
Very
because
interesting.
it broke the social isolation, right?
mm,
So so we had people joining in from Hawaii, from Papua New Guinea, Tongans who live in Papua New Guinea, Fijians, just
mm,
joining in to shoot the breeze and talk about anything. And then it evolved, and now that's become an actual kalapu. Now we've got the Inasi Global Cover Club, and we've been involved in, like, in the when Hunga Tonga Hunga Hapai erupted. We helped with the containers that we sent from New Zealand to Tonga. 90 odd 20-foot equivalent containers we sent from here to help, and we supported the efforts during the flooding to promote, getting people tested for COVID, all that sort of stuff. It became a practical platform. Te tala noa noa ia, eh? There's
Mm.
a purpose and a reason why we gather. So we focused on things that help the community in our whaikava, because we all know most whaikava now is well bill tala noa noa ia with the tauā, make jokes, and nothing really useful and like that rich information that would be useful to share. That platform's not there. So in my village kalapu, like last night, we ran a kalapu with a theme around mental health and addiction and disability, and we brought in some speakers. And luckily, we had a bit of funding from an organization called Whanuaola and Leva, who provided us some funding to share important information, with information that most of these whaikawa guys would never sit down and talk about this stuff. But if you frame it in a way that you got good food, good speakers, people they can relate to, it becomes suddenly a real open conversation. And we had some, even some tears. We invited families to come and listen, whanongo, older people, taurekereka, youth. We had a lot of youth there last night. So the platform like we're doing at Talanoa is really important, because when you don't have Talanoa, there's something happening. It's better to bring it out. Yeah, let these things be discussed, but it has to be curated well. It has to be, done really well, not just ainoa ia.
Mm.
Mm.
Very fascinating that a digital Kava club came out of COVID. I
Yeah.
find that very, very interesting. And this is one of the ways that I measure what's the way to say this, whether an idea is useful or how strong a concept
Mm.
is how it's able to adapt, right? And to me, just thinking about our ancestors thousands of years ago, sitting around a kava bowl, talking about things that mattered for thousands of years. You come to the modern era, it's still adopted. And then, even through a worldwide pandemic, through technology where it's not even as in person, as direct as it initially is, the fact that this kava concept is so adaptive that it can facilitate many generations, many forums, digital, in person, right? That it can do all those things is fascinating to me. That just goes to show that the idea, that the concept is a very powerful one. And that could be one of many reasons why our ancestors were able to hold some type of structure over thousands and thousands of miles, over thousands of years. So I thought that's a really, really interesting idea there.
Mm.
Give us, I think it's important to really understand the context of Tupou the first. Obviously he's from, his mother's from Vaini. What is from the Vaini history, cultural history? What is the story behind and the context behind Taufa'ahau growing up, where his parents were, where he grew up, kind of the perspective from the circles that you've been around as to who, how, and why he became what he became for the Kingdom of Tonga?
Yeah, tolo be more awake, because this is going to touch on some pelipelingas here. There's some sensitive areas, but I'm willing to go there for the fact that, to share and in the spirit of Talanoa. So Vaini has a story that's both very powerful but sad as well, because, to be honest, the Havea did not accept Taufa'ahau. They wanted to assassinate the child before he was born. There were reasons for that, and they go back to the old religion of Tonga. Because the Havea were pagan. We were not Christian. We held out right to the last until probably 1853 when Bear fell. That was when we finally gave up and basically just said, "Oh, what the hell?" We just went there. We were not defeated. That's a myth. They tried to invade the fortress at Bear multiple times, Taufa'ahau and his tautahi, and they couldn't do it. And it came to a point where they were just sick. Our people were sick of defending it, that they sent out a lowly matapure that went out and basically covered himself in a mat and said, "Here, do your worst." And that's where the title Taumafakava comes from, fight with the blanket. So that was like a kape, like saying, you couldn't beat us militarily, we'll just give it to you. So that's a version from the Havea. Hence why the Lavaka title is such an influential, powerful title. The king holds that title. Ma'afu is the head of the Havea. And so, as the head of the Havea, he's in control of some of the most powerful chiefs in the central part of Tonga Tapu, including Waia, Tuivakano, all of the chiefs that are associated with the Havea as the children of Mataere Tuapiko. Now, because of that influence of the Samoan thing I touched on before,
Mm-hmm.
this Samoanization or the Matai influence in Tonga is something that Tiasi Laiu, theorized and wrote his thesis on, his first one, and it's all in there, so I won't cover that area. But it's very powerful the way that influenced how Tonga's shift from the Kauhala Uta, the Tuitonga line, into where we are now, the Tuikanuku line. It's very, very linked with what happened in Vaini. So I'll go back to why they wanted to murder the child before he was even born. So Homa Whareono, who was the mother of Maafu, was the daughter of Malu Taufa. And he was blind. He was an old man by this time, Malu Taufa, the Maafu at the time. And the troops that were sent to assassinate the child couldn't find him. And apparently he'd been holotaki to Pea first, to Lavaka, to be under his protection. And this is where the two versions come in, because the story is that Nai Whakahifo I Fualu, that Homa Whareono had the child there. But in Hapai, they argue that the child was born en route to Pangai. And hence you have all these stories of the Lua, all of the, anyway, I won't go into all that. You probably all heard of that. I have my own version from Vaini, because
Yeah,
we
share
have a
that
place.
version, the version you feel comfortable with. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't want to refute either the
Mm.
Hapai version of his birth, or in Niue, they say he was born and his placenta is buried in Niue in Pangai. That may be the case. Nobody will really know. But in Fualo, they say that there's a place close to, just behind there, that's where he was birthed and his placenta is buried there. For me, spiritually, Taufa'ahau's home, or where his mother's from, is Vaini. So my personal view is that his placenta would have been buried there, because that's his mother's village.
Mm.
Eh?
Yeah.
That's where you hold your power base. Sadly, his mother's clan did not see it that way, because of this prophecy that if Homo Faleono had the baby, because the father of the baby was Tupou from Hapai, and there was massive enmity between the Havea chiefs and the Tupou. So there's a lot of politics around it as well. So that's why they wanted to murder the baby. Also, it wasn't helped by the fact that Homo Faleono, she had a craving for human blood.
Mm.
Apparently, when she was having the baby, when she was holding the baby, she would crave to drink human blood, and that was a sign taken by the Daula, the priests, that this child would be very warlike and will have massive impacts on Tonga, which he did. So that's basically the Vaini side of the story. All these other versions are just as valid. I'm just sharing our perspective, and the names like Pakilau, the Aotearoa Taufa'ahau, which is where the close to where the cemetery is. These are all tied in with that narrative of Taufa'ahau being from Vaini on his mother's side.
Yeah. There's a lot of discussion that he was, as a child, very sickly. Is that part of your guys' perception, and what kind of role that plays at all in his history? I've heard that led him to going to Kautai, but what's the perception there? Was he sickly? What was the nature of the sickness, and what led to that whole story or belief of that?
Yeah, I think that's where the name Taufa'ahau came from, when they took him to Kautai, the priest.
Mm-hmm.
And so I believe that would have been the case. There was something, possibly some illness he might have had as a child, but he certainly grew out of it, because when he became an adolescent, he was one of the best warriors. He grew up to be a very strong. In fact, his name, Mayaka came from that. His arms were so muscled, they were like iron cables, and that's where the name comes from. And he was well known as skilled with sika and spear throwing, wrestling, whangatua, boxing. So he wasn't sick for long, is what I'm trying to say. He was probably ill as a child, but that could have been because of the story of him being holataki, tapu mo e mo wharela. That that may have an impact if you're constantly moving, going on boats, that sort of thing.
Put stress on the body.
Probably,
Yeah.
put stress on on a young child and a baby, maybe.
Any questions or anything from you, Mr. Aotearoa? I
No,
got a
no, no,
million.
just
So
yeah,
yeah.
no. I just add on to what Pakilau just kind of mentioned. Like his physical traits were, was undeniable. But just added. I think the another thing that Taufa'ahau really the first, Tupou the first really I think mastermind that actually grown his influence was his navigation. Like him traveling between Tonga Tapu, Ha'apai, Vava'u, and expanding even a lot more. I think not only that, but the amount of troops, like it was like easy for him to Takifolau like 200 people on a canoe. So, that knowledge gives you a huge advantage on moving military groups in today is not easy logistically,
Mm-hmm.
but Taufa'ahau, and that's why Tonga was able to be Tonga now, okay, Tonga be a Tonga. It's because he had the physical ability, but I think it's all in the mind because him
Mm.
navigating and mastering the ocean navigation led him to what? Create the Constitution of Tonga in Tongan, because that's what helped Tonga to maintain its sovereignty and was a big part of Tonga for people during the 1800s, seeing Tonga as a way that it's a different compared to all the other Polynesian neighbors that they were visiting to, that Tonga was able to maintain that. And I feel like this is the reason why Taufa'ahau the first took Tonga to the modern age, with him being the modern king of all of Tonga. But that's just a little. Let's just adding on to what you were saying, Pakilau. With he had the physical ability, that's a number one, but not everyone can see the vision and have the mind, the intuition. What Taufa'ahau the first, and I believe he had a special calling by God to lead Tonga to a new modern era. So, yeah, that's just kind of my addition to what
Yeah.
Pakilau was kind of mentioning.
It's a really important thing. It's being very talented physically is very helpful, right? It's
Mm,
very helpful. It's impressive, especially when you're living in a time where it's been like 4 generations of civil war going
mm.
on in Tonga. It's been,
300 years. Yeah, it was
300
like,
years
yeah.
of instability. So obviously there's that physical prowess is very, very important. That is very helpful, like as a jump start, right? Like for the
Mm,
first, let's say if it's a sprint,
mm,
being physically gifted is the first 10 to 15 meters very helpful, right? You can
mm,
you can attract warriors, you can attract support, but what gets you to the finish line is leadership and being able to inspire people. Like that's the rare. That's the rare talent, right?
mm,
I can't tell you how many guys have big arms, how many guys are physically like imposing and so forth.
mm,
That lasts maybe for like 15 seconds before the kickoff of the game. But once the game starts, right, and it's a team sport, there are ways to maneuver and address physicality. My question is, any kind of context you can give, Manase, how and why was Taufa'ahau able to do two things? Inspire warriors, because
mm,
that's a very difficult thing. I might follow you because I'm afraid of you, because you're bigger
mm,
than me. Well, wait till another bigger guy comes. Then I'm gonna, that can only go for so long. So
mm,
how was he able to inspire these
Mm.
warriors and people? And then the second, where did he get this knowledge? I'm very interested,
mm,
like the navigation, and then also the tactics and strategy, whether it's military, whether it's politics, administration, kind of those two
mm,
areas. I don't hear a lot of discussions on.
Mm.
We learn before. I apologize for the long question, Manase. We learn about Alexander the Great. He was taught by the great philosophers, right? All the great teachers of war. We hear of all these great minds who did all these great things. I don't hear a lot of discussion on well, where exactly does this guy learn the things that he learned, and so that he could be that successful? Any context or anything you can share about how he was able to inspire people, and where did all this knowledge come from
Mm.
that he leveraged to do what he did?
Oh yeah, that is very astute question, because obviously this goes to leadership ability.
Mm.
Mhm.
Some will have it innately, naturally,
Mm.
and some are born with it. I think Taufa'ahau was blessed with both. He has the physical presence as well as born natural ability to lead, and some of it was also learnt and traits that he picked up as he went along. Because the watershed moment for Taufa'ahau was, I think, 1826, I think, when the war at Velaka, when Laufilitonga and he both at their prime met on battle, and Tupou lucky came out on top. Now it was close, there was a lot of toing and froing. In fact, he almost got killed if it wasn't for Tuhatoka saving him, and hence the name Tuhatoka. The Tongan history would have been a lot shorter had he, been killed at that battle. But that was a watershed moment, and he was able to draw on his knowledge of genealogy. Like, he went to Havea, connected with the family of Havea, and tried to bring him to the war. Unsuccessfully at first, until his sister said, "Well, you stay there as a man. I'll go and fight with him, even though I'm a woman." So that shamed him to move, and he then went to Uiha and got the two twins, Malu sons, who were incredible warriors. So it wasn't just his physical traits, they weren't impressed by that. They were also moved by the family connections, because he was related to these people. So he was able to influence them. He was also a very tactical orator, a fantastic speaker. He could calmly talk, persuade, and use those skills as well. And so again, these are things that are innate in some people, and others not so much. But he had a well-rounded character, physically, mentally, intellectually, the whole thing. And then coupled with his ability to get the right people around him, Shirley Baker, he much later on he was able to use these white people, Palangi people, to his advantage, rather than being used by them. Some people would argue the other way. So I think he had all the right qualities, and also some good luck, if we're honest. So things could have
Mm.
turned on a dime. But like you say, it could be providence, the could have been blessed by God, because one of the, again, foundational things that he did was to give Tonga to God, a tufonua.
Mhm.
Mm.
And that was an amazing thing in terms of our views as Christians or whatever faith. For a king to voluntarily give up his soil and everything to God, I think is a first. I can't think of any other island or group that have done that voluntarily. But that I think is a window to his character and to his abilities as a leader. He went to
Mm.
Samoa, and you know, got his better, but not just got the better, he got it done in one day. And having done the better myself and gone through the pain of it, you have to be absolutely ruthless in your psychology to get it done in one day. And that's a testament to the guy, to the king, of his bravery and courage. That so much so that the Samoans were freaked out at what he was able to do, physically. So he was a guy with physical strength, mental strength, and spiritual strength. The tukufonua, the tātatau, and his knowledge of what Samoans call ngafa hohoko, to bring his family together and take them forward, share a vision, and to drive forward and get it. He didn't just sit back on his heels. He was in there, right in the
Mm.
mix.
Well, there's a couple things I want to kind of get into, especially on the Tukufonua. What was obviously Taufa'ahau was persecuted before he was quote unquote born, right? For religious reasons. And as we look at the how his life played out, if there were some spiritual influences, they were right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep,
He did go
absolutely.
in. And interesting. One of the interpretations that we understand of Taufa'ahau's name is like a little storm from Ahau is what I understand as some of the translations that Kautai gave to him. How was that? Was that ever resolved with his grandfather and his family? What led to that resolution? And then I'm gonna pivot into his conversion story, which is also really important. I think you can't fully understand why Taufa'ahau did what he did with the Tuku Fonua without understanding his conversion story, because that is a you don't just give your nation to God for the sake of giving it to God, right? Like that is a extraordinary act of faith. But what's the context of how that issue of that prophecy of him being a destructive force, did that ever get resolved with his grandfather and his mother's side of the family before we kind of dive into his conversion story?
Short answer, no. That's still up in the air, because remember, the Havea were pagan. They were forced into Christianity, unlike Hapai and arguably Wava'u, who basically all turned when Christianity arrived. The Havea fought it all the way through until the end of the Civil War. So some of them turned to the church that Taufa'ahau, Wesleyan, and the rebels that fought again with Catholic. See, even though they did convert, they converted to the other side of Christianity, to another denomination. So there's all that sort of stuff. So some of that friction is still there. If we're honest, if we look at the depth of politics in Tonga, a lot of it's still hanging around the split amongst the Ha'a over the Christianizing of Tonga. Yeah,
Yes.
the
Trust me.
Havea were loyal to the bone to the Tuitonga, and because remember the Havea, the kids of the Matale Tuapiko, were gifted forever hereditary title by the Tuitonga, named after the parts of the Karia. Yeah? Mafu is the compass. Yeah? Fohe. If you look at the names, La Vaka. Yeah? They are all parts of the Karia, of the Tuitonga. Fuaki me Tuitonga. So when the war occurred, it caused a massive rupture in the fabric of Tongan society. Because Tongan society was usually very uniform, peaceful. The wars we had were outside of Tonga, never in Tonga. Yeah? It was after the assassination of Tupou that things started going all over
Falling
the place.
apart. Yeah.
And that is a lot of that's to do with the old religions as well, and the forces of Christianity coming in. Kava, from the old religion to what we have now. And even there, even with Christianity, there were different denominations split amongst those. That's my view, and it still hasn't been healed, in my honest opinion.
100%. Trust me, we have a lot of family in La Paja, and they are staunch Catholics, and they, in many ways, consider themselves separate. When you have a part of your village called Tuaheri, there's a reason for that, because there's a certain mentality and and they're proud of it, right? A lot of them like to this day. Yeah, right. It's what we say sometimes is that tui halafatai switch.
Yeah.
Once that switch goes, and that's one thing that all Polynesians have, right? We see it in almost every Polynesian. Everything is good until it ain't, and once it's not good, we go from really, really good to really, really bad real quick. Right. So yeah, fascinating. So yeah, it sounds like it was never fully resolved. There's some tension there, which is kind of interesting. That's have a bunch of other things further down the road in Taufa'ahau's history that could be interesting, and even to the royal family now. But what is your understanding of the primary drivers behind Taufa'ahau's conversion? One of the reasons why I bring this up is online there is a thought process or ideas that Taufa'ahau sold out Tonga, sold out Polynesians. He just sold out. He was purely a political animal. And when I say animal, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. It's just, because I understand, but we're speaking in plain language here, that he was politically thinking in a political manner that
Interest, yeah.
yes, it was about self-preservation, Taufa'ahau, saving Taufa'ahau, totally conceding to Christianity and the missionaries. That's why he became Christian. From your understanding, what were the drivers and the motivation of Taufa'ahau's conversion to Christianity, and any stories you can share about his conversion process?
That's a really complex question and hard to answer succinctly, but I'll try and perhaps look at it from this view. Had Taufa'ahau not converted, I doubt he would have changed Tonga to the way it has. I think that the influences of the missionaries certainly helped, particularly people like Baker and others who were very influential in setting up the constitution, helped with converting other countries even. Tonga was the sort of the headquarters for the Methodist Wesleyan Church to go out into Samoa and other places, Fiji. So I can understand where some people see Tonga as selling out in that perspective, because Christianity was often used as a tool of the colonizer to get a foothold into the islands. The difference with Tonga is that Taufa'ahau saw that threat as well and shrewdly maneuvered to self-preservation, absolutely, because he made the constitution go back to the Tuitonga system of primogeniture, father, son, father, son, father, son. Yeah? So he changed the Tuikanokupolu system of collateral succession back to the old Tuitonga way through the constitution, basically bringing back the old religion by stealth, because these are all religious things.
Yes.
The belief of primogeniture, the inasi, all of that stuff is based on
hereditary,
the old religion of Tonga that that Taufa'ahau was able to do by stealth. Still had the look of Christian, still had the look of a constitutional monarchy, and this is the brilliance of the move: is that Tonga went back to the old Tonga, but with a framework of a Western constitution, and that to me is lost a bit. People don't quite understand how Taufa'ahau had brought back what Tonga used to be, centralized, heavily centralized under the Tuitonga system. Taimea koe, every village had its own chief, very similar to Samoa. They had pockets during the Civil War. Because there was a period of interregnum in Tongan history where the chiefs in your own villages, koia bil malohi hauia, takai and fae, go in Hifo, you'd go to Kava, Hawa Kava, Hawa Ukalala,
little chiefdoms all over the place.
Little chiefdoms all over the place. And they would build their fortifications. That was unheard of in the time of the Tuitonga. Tuitonga was one authority for the whole group. Taufa'ahau essentially brought that back under him through that, and justified by the fact that he defeated Laufilitonga at Velaka. And there's contention, I know, between Kauhalauta and Kauhalalalo around whether the full now with Tuitonga, whether that was fully gifted. My belief is that it was, but others believe that no, it was gifted to the Catholic Church, to the priest, as the full now. But we're allowed to have our differences of opinion. And go Taumafakava. We're using that now of Kauhalauta, but in a varied way for the Tuikanokupolu. But all of that was brought from Kauhalauta originally. And Kava for Nua, apart from the Tuitongas.
100%. Yeah. And we definitely believe in that, at least from what we hear from our side, is Laufilitonga 100% gifted that to Taufa'ahau. And we can get into that. Yeah, we can get into that a little bit further later on, because I think that's a miraculous thing to happen.
But see, that's spiritual. See, what he did was he gifted the old religion. Manduka Tonga is a priest for Hikureo.
Yes.
He gifted ta whanua tu Taufa'ahau. Ko ingoe whanwhano.
Yeah.
Whanwhano I kātoa na mawhai as a priest of Hikureo tu Taufa'ahau. That the name, the Taumafakava, Tupou, is an old god from Fiji. Tupou, dynasty of Tupou. And so we still use it, the house of Tupou, because the tuikana kupolu we whakanofo na koka ni hifo, and that koka was special to Fiji. It's got a tie back to the Lalau group and that whole deity around Tupou. Anyway, we're kind of straying a bit, but that old stuff hasn't gone. It's still, we still have the Taumafakava ceremony. We still have all of these things imbued with the Christian stuff.
No, 100%. And I think as we follow Taufa'ahau's timeline, we'll come around after that. But I want to kind of come back to that. Now that we kind of said, yeah, he leveraged the opportunity and that's what a leader does, right?
Yeah.
Right. When you're a general, you look at the landscape and you try to find ways to make the landscape work to your advantage.
Absolutely.
That's not selling out. That's what we call using your brain, right? And using the resources around you. I think it's kind of a very lazy argument to say, oh, he just sold out because that happened. If you don't want to dig deep, okay, you're satisfied with that answer, so be it. But typically, if you just dig a little bit deeper, you'll find different reasons for it.
And evidence to that, bro, is even to the point where he was on the verge of conversion, Taufa'ahau tested the Christian God. He still feared his old gods right up to the point of conversion by the fact that when he voyaged from Tonga to Hawaii, he was with Pitavi, one of the Christian missionaries who was teaching him about the faith. And he thought to himself, I'm about to baptize and convert to this new religion. What are my own gods going to do to me? Because they saved my life under Kautai. Remember, the old God saved him. He was almost dead. So he said, I'm going to do something totally unpredictable. He grabbed the whaiwhikau, threw him overboard, and said, if your God is real, you will survive. And this is shark-infested water, right? And he was about 2 miles off. And they left him there, and they went back to the coast. And he thought he was going to die because they had a Kava ceremony. They had the full thing, and he thought to himself, no, he's not going to make it.
He's
Nobody
gone.
swam from there. He's gone. Hour later, there's this old man walking into the Kava circle. That's the moment Taufa'ahau converted. That's when he believed that the new God was more powerful than the old God. Because the shark, Taufa'atahi, was actually following the canoe. Remember, this was his totem. This was his family God. So he knew that, if this God was so powerful, he would not let the shark eat Pitavi. The rest is history.
Yeah, 100%. And I've heard there's another version of that story that I find, like you said, we weren't there.
Yeah.
But there's another version of that story that I heard recently that's it really impacted me. And I could imagine that if I was Taufa'ahau, doing that, grabbing Pitavi and throwing him in. Another version I've heard is Taufa'ahau throws a spear into the water and then asks Pitavi, you believe your God is the most powerful God? Go bring me that spear. And Pitavi willingly jumps in, grabs the spear, and brings it over to Taufa'ahau while he's sitting in the Kava ceremony. I don't know if someone engineered that story to enhance it, but if that is true, because we have to think, and what makes me believe that story a little bit, Manase, is look at what he does down the road. He provides people the opportunity to make choices themselves, right? The emancipation, the Constitution, the giving of the opportunity to own private property. Very fascinating. And to me, I like that version a little bit better. Who knows if it's true or not? Because if you're an individual who says, "Oh, I'm going to throw you in," it's not as powerful as in you say you believe in this God, Pitavi, you chose it. How much do you really believe in that? Because if I throw you in the water, you have no option, right? You're going to try
Yeah.
and survive. But if I challenge you, if I challenge your individual faith and say, "Oh, eh? Did you just join Christianity to be convenient? You saw the resources they had, and
Mm.
here you are trying to convince me." I found that version a little bit because I've always heard the one you've had, right? Toss him in. Heard a different one where it was totally different. And I was like, you know what? That seems to be very feasible. This is an intelligent guy, and he understands, like you're saying. I understand the old gods. And just to be very straightforward, these old gods knew things, right? They obviously had a prophecy. Some of these old gods didn't like him because they said get rid of him. And there is oral history that Taufa'ahau did not necessarily go and demolish, let's say, the old religion. What he did demolish was because out of this fracturing for hundreds of years, there were little gods, because these little chiefdoms, there were these little gods or religions established where they started worshiping their immediate ancestors and making them gods, right? And supposedly there's some history behind that, and I'm biased to it because I am definitely a believer of Hikuleo. As wild as this sounds, we get a lot of heat for this. I don't mind it. People don't, it's free world. Hikuleo is the Old Testament Jehovah, in my opinion, in my singular opinion. And I believe that this is why Polynesians in general have embraced Christianity, because there are some similarities. Granted, we corrupted the old religion and so forth, but it is fascinating to me. Let me put it this way, Manase. You don't go in one lifetime, right? Of I believe in the ancient gods. They saved me. I see these things as real, and within one lifetime, you're saying I'm not going to ask any foreign power to protect my people. I'm going to ask this God. There has to be, in my opinion, enough overlap of faith and experience to leverage that kind of, because it's unheard of. That is literally and we're not just talking about the Pacific and Polynesia, the world in general, that is unheard of. Just some thoughts. I don't know, Masi, if you have anything to add to that, and then we'll continue on the conversion story here.
No, just to add on to it, like just to kind of like what you said to for Taufa'ahau, he had it's almost like a spiritual intervention that he felt probably like what you said to there's I don't know any native people in their native land to say Tufo Nua Giotua. Like let him every chief and all his advisors saying we need to align with America. No, align with Britain because they had the most powerful navy in that time. No, align with France because the Catholics were building, their church all around the Pacific that time through Tahiti and everything. So but but Taufa'ahau in the Polyn to me out of all the Polynesian islands, and not even that, you can go to like the native people, First Nation people, wherever they were at. No one did anything like this. Taufa'ahau, the only one, didn't on his own terms said no. We're gonna have faith in God the Father, right? Just God. So to me, you don't do things like that because you don't do things like that because one, throughout history, I only know Tonga as the first nation people still have sovereignty up to today. And how did he achieve that? And like you said, we talked about it. There's luck in it, maybe, and luck has to play with you when you make the right decisions in the chess, right? When you in an advantage position, you're gonna need some luck. Luck. What is the luck that how go? My man lived all the way up to 100 years old. I think he died when he was in his 90s. Like,
Mm.
right? So he was like, other than his being when he was a child, he was not very sick. Remember, this is a time where illness and plagues, this flu was prominent, spreading, killing many of the Polynesian islands and neighbors. Taufa'ahau survived. Like, to me, there's so many luck, but what came to the luck? Did he, because he put Tonga to God? He didn't choose a certain allegiance to a Western power. Like, to me, to a, like you said, where did he get that from? He had to be spiritually, and we differentiate with the Lotumua being the ancient, right, religion of Tonga, and then the Lotumui, which is the Christianity that come. And there has to be something that he felt like it was similar, because it's almost like he risked his entire, what he fought for or what he was trying to bring Tonga together, and he was risking pretty much everything, saying, we're not going to go with a superpower, we're going to go with something we won't see, but we can believe in, and have, and let's just say, have good hope. So I'm just going to go with those lines. Like, I don't know about you, Pakilau, but like,
Mm.
how, like I said, man, like, his history is so, it's
Yeah.
so amazing, and it's inspiration for every Tongan people. Like, if you're the only one doing something different, bet on yourself and risk it all. As long as you have faith that it's gonna come out well, but you work hard. Because Taufa'ahau, that's one thing people don't know. He was picking the right people, because we all know during that time, a lot of the Palangis had their self-interest. He was able to have the political will and the strength, let's just say the mental strength, to make sure he was picking the right people to associate with to create the Tongan constitution. He was able to have good advisors, because at the same time, Tonga, like you said, we just came out of civil war for 300 years. People were still trying to grab their own certain chiefdoms or whatever, other what Tafaha was trying to do, centralize the political power within him. So that's just my thoughts. Like, there's so many aspects of the history. Like, Taufa'ahau, man, like, it's amazing, and I can only see like miracles that really played into it. But that's just my thoughts, Pakilau.
I want to add something to that, and this is something that I think is really important. The people who are really lucky, Manase and Masi,
Mhm,
it's the guys that God chose. You
mhm.
you look at the Bible. Why is it the guys that God chose and the guys that are obedient to God? How come they're always lucky? Right?
Yeah.
Moses. How come in Egypt they get 10 plagues and they destroy the largest economy, the largest army, the most powerful army, and they were a bunch of slaves?
Mm.
Well, it's because God was on their side. When we watch and listen to Taufa'ahau's life,
Mm.
you cannot help but see certain patterns. Like, for example,
Mm.
persecuted or tried to be killed at a very young age. Many
Even before he was
examples.
born. Yeah.
Yes. Many examples in the scriptures of
Oh, yeah.
similar things,
Mm.
right? A significant conversion to God and a reliance on God. Very common. I was reading a book on Abraham Lincoln. And as I was reading the book on Abraham Lincoln, I was like, this reminds me of someone. And you know who it reminded me of? Tupou
What
the First. And it's almost happening at the same time.
time period?
Same time periods, right? And what does Abraham Lincoln do? The first 100 years of America is great. They're growing. And then what happens?
Civil War.
Civil War. And Abraham Lincoln is the critical piece that's going to try and keep this nation together, an experimental idea and nation. Tupou the First arguably does the same.
Mm.
One of the big splitting points is emancipating or giving freedom to people across, irrespective of where you're from or whatever. That's what he does. He gives freedom to the slaves, right? And so there is a lot of things happening in a very similar time. George Washington for America, he never won a single war when he became the general of the
So they
Continental Army. And all he did was he never won a war, a battle in the Continental Army. All he did was stay alive, stay alive, stay alive, right? And depending on what certain versions, this may be a little controversial for the Vaini people, but the Catholics, like you said, politics and history is written by those who have whatever.
Oh yeah,
There are
yeah.
stories in La Paja and amongst the Catholics that in Velata, Taufa'ahau didn't win. But that's their version, right? Of course, they would have a version of that. And of course, Taufa'ahau would have a version where he wins. And so if you were to take that position, Taufa'ahau doesn't win, but he continues to progress. He continues to work hard. And eventually, the tide turns for him. I have a question to ask Manase here is, why did Laufilitonga give Tupou the first Kava, Taumafakava, right? Because the Tuitonga's Kava is Furitaunga, which we cover this relatively close on some of our podcasts, where the Furitaunga is literally a representation of the stars and the movement of the sun in the Kava ceremony and the cardinal directions. From your perspective, and it sounds like you're a believer that it was gifted to Taufa'ahau. Obviously, if you're a staunch opponent of Taufa'ahau from the Catholic position, you would make that argument. This is politics plays a role in a lot of things. But from your perspective, why did Laufilitonga give that to Taufa'ahau?
I can't presume to know Laufilitonga's intent, but I think Laufilitonga could see a powerful leader in Taufa'ahau and someone that if you're going to give it away to, this would be the person to give it to, right? It's going to happen anyway. And again, this is reading it from Havea, from my side of the fence. Whether you believe Taufa'ahau beat him fair and square in the war or not, the fact of the matter is the mana of the Tuitonga, the achiness of it never disappeared, but the title did, which gives you a clue that something political happened. So common sense is that there was a defeat of sorts, but not complete, because the now, like I said, was transferred. Like fanfano, it was given to Taufa'ahau to continue it on. And then what Taufa'ahau did was take that and build it into a legal framework under his constitution, bring back the rule of primogeniture, the father-son thing, and build that into our constitution and protect his family to become in effect, the Tuitonga, the new line of the kings in Tonga. So for me, he was not a perfect man either. He was a human, Taufa'ahau, and I think that his faith was tested throughout his reign. I think there were
100%.
moments of doubt. Like for me, if you'd converted and you were purely, truly Christian, which he was, he went to Samoa in the later part of his reign to get the full tātātau against the wishes of the Christian missionaries. Why would you do that, right? So was he testing his faith again? Doing it in one day, which could kill you, literally.
Yeah,
the
get
fastest you can
infection.
get sepsis or whatever. Even today, that's a high risk. Imagine back then with no antiseptic and doing it in one day, the blood loss, the amount of pain you'd be in. Was he testing his faith? I don't know. But I think what Taufa'ahau was going through some turmoil internally of his own to make sure that at every point he was doing the right thing for his people, to the point where he put his own life at risk. That's the mentality of the guy. And I'm biased because I'm from Vaini. We're a little bit crazy like that. We'll do stuff like
Vaini poto,
bread.
Vaini poto, Pakilau.
Vaini poto, eh?
Vaini poto.
I'm going to do it in one day. I'm going to grab the whaiwheka and throw him over the boat. That's a very Vaini thing to do. Koe hanga pe, e kusia tapu mo whare la.
Yeah.
But ko tangata loto lahi a
Mm.
Taufa'ahau. But na kei ke fia of his own gods and the new god. Eh?
Mm.
But he was not stupid either. He would test. He would always put out something. Like one of the things that I'm still reconciling was the amount of bloodshed he caused in Tonga. He killed a
Mm.
lot of people coming through to the end of the Civil War in 1853. You know, the fortress of Hule, eh? A
Mm.
massacre of Hule was a barbarian thing to do. He killed men, women, and children. Absolutely annihilated Hule. And, to me, that's not the actions of a Christian
Mm.
person to do that. Very ruthless. So there are snippets of his psychology to me that still harken back to maybe a darker side of his personality, because we don't want to reify him as he was a human being like everyone. We have faults, and
Mhm.
to me, even though he did give his all to the church and tukufonua to Tonga, part of him was still that old side of Tonga. I believe that he had right to his death, he was constantly tugging to and fro between the old religion and the new. But that's just my thinking
Mm.
on it.
Yeah. Masi, any thoughts on that?
Uh, no, Dua, just regarding the politics, and we'll kind of touch with Taufa'ahau with his politicking, because right, like Pakilau, you kind of mentioned like the politics that played a role in Taufa'ahau, and I think Taufa'ahau understands power, because I know there's a he was the missionaries were kind of going against him when he did there was a certain thing he did. So when he was part of the Wesleyan faith, he all his followers of the Wesleyan faith would pay their tithe to Australia and Sydney, and he made a change when he was internally fighting, maybe, and that's why maybe he went to Ha'amo or something, when he made the tithe to stay in Tonga,
Mm.
right? He made them. He knew, if we're all praying to the same God, we kind of touched about this there too, right? Praying to the same God. Why do I need to send my tithing
Mm.
to Australia? Keep it here in Tonga, which what gave birth to the the Free Wesleyan Church of Tonga, which still
Yeah,
exists today, because of making that choice. That helps you. That helps you to centralize the power, not politically, but now the religion, right,
mm.
within Tonga. Then there's the missionaries. There was internal kind of brewing, because I know the missionaries didn't like that move that Taufa'ahau did with that. And then regarding the Hula story and some of the oral history that I've kind of heard, and maybe two has heard maybe different or the same, but like what you said, it wasn't a Christian thing. But I know, like what you said, Taufa'ahau, what he did in Hure, he had to make sure what he says, because apparently from the oral history we've heard, he gave them warning to
Vacate.
evacuate or vacate from the fort, the Kolotau, to vacate. And I think it was out of, I don't know, twice or when it came to the third time, they still didn't, because apparently what we with the oral history is they kicked out Tu'ivaga no, it was in Nugu in Huri, kicked the chief out, and the people were kind of maintaining this area. And Taufa'ahau had to make his word mean something. If you didn't go, he's gonna. It's almost like the story, and we keep going to the biblical story. What did the prophet tell Saul when he
Yeah.
went when they're
Samuel.
having or Samuel told Saul to do? Don't keep the sheep. Don't keep the animals, the kids. Don't keep
Nothing.
anybody. You kill everything, right? You kill everything. This ain't not a Christian thing. It's the same thing with what Tafahau did, right? I don't, maybe different circumstances, but I'm just thinking like Tafahau said to go, you don't go. I'm everybody, the kids and everybody, we're gonna eliminate. It's almost like a cleanse, right? And it's faraofa, because this was during the time of civil war. War. You're gonna have collateral damage. It's very nasty. So Tafahau had to make a point, because when he says to go, you need to go. If not, you're not gonna go, because he's gonna eliminate the whole thing. So that's kind of the oral history that I've kind of heard with Taufa'ahau. And we're just kind of talking about his his uh, his behaviors. Taufa'ahau was a very serious guy. I don't know if he was somebody you can test, because he's already proven it with his skills in navigation and moving armies and stuff. You do when you make a warning, don't go back on it, because if not, if you gave a warning and let's say you gave people survive, the story is gonna go. Tatara no is gonna go through all of Tonga Eki and go to Hapai Babao and say, oh, Taufa'ahau will only take away a little people, but he will let some people survive. We'll keep testing. Just knowing Tongan behavior. Until until I'm getting beaten up, and that's why beaten you have you get beaten up, and then you say, okay, this guy's for real. And I feel like it's just a point of view that Taufa'ahau was just saying, if you guys didn't vacate, I'm gonna. It's a it's a message to maybe prevent further wars.
Another
From what I
300
get,
years of instability. How
Iyo.
many
And
more
then,
lives if we go for 300 more years of civil
Iyo.
war?
Well, and that's the thing, and then that's the story. When it came to Ngereia, with that fort in Ngereia, they were able to have a peaceful resolution. No one really died from the some of the oral history that I've heard. But that's just me, Pakilau, kind of sharing what I understand regarding that. I don't know, Tua,
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
different or
You know, this is my first time hearing of the tatatau in one day with the missionaries kind of stopping him. Once this is what it tells me when I hear that. The old religion was never fully neglected because there's a lot of overlap, right?
Mm,
When you read George Vason's account, it is very clear to George Vason, ancient Tongans had very, very similar practices to ancient Israel. And he says that many times. He says, number one, he says, some of these people are so white, they look like they're European. That's one thing he said. Another one he said is, I see many practices that these non-Christians, these savages, that are very similar to ancient Israel, right? Then I'm going to remind everyone, and we mentioned this with our podcast with one of our other brothers. You know what God doesn't like? To test him inappropriately, right? Like when someone comes to say, I will believe in God if you do this, God. You know what God typically does with those people? He strikes them down. Many examples in the scriptures. But then we have Taufa'ahau Tupou the first. He does the same thing. But God reacts very differently, right? Because it's not just once. Apparently, he with that one with Pitavi, then there's one where the missionaries are talking to him and they stick the umbrella or a stick during low tide, right? And the tide is held back. Two tides, two high tides are held back. God typically says, you will not tempt the Lord thy God. You could make the argument that if Taufa'ahau is making these claims of God, you could make the argument, hey, he's tempting the Lord God. But obviously, God is saying, no, this guy is sincere. There is much more going on in his mind and in his heart than just, oh, right? Then you look back that he was under the tutelage of one of the oldest and most respected taulas of the old religion. And who knows what knowledge he got access to there. And then the name he gets when he leaves, very interesting. And the reason why I share this is he obviously is a man of faith where God has answered his requests that he doesn't always do, and actually takes it very negative when certain people ask him to do these things. Then he goes and gets a tattoo. That doesn't make any sense. The only thing I can think of is he understands, at least in my opinion, the overlap of what his people were before and the future. And you cannot neglect one over the other. And you can't do that. Because if he did that, he would not be the person that he is. So to me, I think that is evidence of his intent to do what is right and to keep moving forward. And as regards to Laufilitonga giving him the Taumafakava, regardless whichever side of the story of Velata, this is an arch enemy, if you want to say that, right? However, if you understand that the Tu'itonga for hundreds of years was no longer a political position. I think there's a reason why Taufa'ahau never invaded Mu'a. The Tu'itonga was not really a political threat. It was a religious threat because he was the high priest of Hikuleo. And what is amazing to me in that scenario, and Masi has mentioned this on the podcast before, Manase, a big reason why a lot of our brothers and sisters fell, lack of unity. There were divisions in power, and because of that division, it gave the opportunity for the Westerners to say, these people are killing themselves, they're uncivilized, they're not unified, we have to bring civilization to them. It looks to me like Laufilitonga saw that change needed to happen. And I could guarantee you the Catholics were telling Laufilitonga, we can get France, we can get Spain, we'll give you guns, we'll give you, you're the Tu'itonga, you can collect people and we'll back you. But
he would have gotten all of Hahake and, let's just say, continue another
easily,
civil war.
exactly.
And then open the gate for colonization. I'm telling you, that would have happened.
Yeah. So to me, I also value what Laufilitonga brought to the table. It was a self-sacrifice to recognize how important it was to unify without bloodshed and to consent to Taufa'ahau. He's proven the political, the military, the administrative talent, and the ability to unify the people to lead Tonga into the future. And I think he made the end. It's all the same blood. These guys are cousins. These guys are family. This is the same blood that's going along. It's better to have someone in the family move us forward. And that is the role of the Tu'ikanu'ku. The Tu'ikanu'ku was brought into existence to run the administrative and the political part of the Tu'itonga Empire. But they also recognized in the new landscape, if you didn't give it the religious aspect of it, they wouldn't be able to move forward. With that being said, Manase, anything? We're coming up on an hour and a half. Any kind of closing thoughts on it seems like Tupou the first really drove this podcast. We can always come back and have other aspects. I really wanted to talk about the experience of the Taumafakava or the Kava ceremony for Ma'afu and some of those things. We could have another podcast for that, but looking at the time, coming up on an hour and a half, any closing thoughts? And then we'll go to Mr. Aotearoa, and then we'll close out this episode.
Thank you, Tuan, and thank you both for the opportunity. And I don't want to presume that I have any say or knowledge as a theologian. So and I do apologize if we strayed into an area that is theirs. But personally, the ends don't justify the means. So I still believe that death killing, no matter in the name of God or whatever, as a human being, is never right in my personal view. And it might be that people will justify death, but for me personally, it's never. Which shows the ruthlessness of Tupou Waki. As a human being, he had his flaws as well. But he may have had the divine sanction to do that. That's for others to study. The other thing I want to just close off with, brothers, is that the practices that we have today are echoes of the past. I remember doing, as a matapule, it's as custodians of the traditions and the culture, to do kava ceremonies and all sorts of things like that. I've done a number of them for the Matematonga, helped out with the setting up of Ma'afu's whakanofo, with the pigs and that sort of thing. So I've observed from inside and outside the way we interact with our protocols and our, Futahelu said it best. The Kava ceremony is the centerpiece of our culture, because in it is the story of rank, in it is the story of our religion. It's our form of the communion, the Holy Communion
Mhm.
Christians have. It's all in that Kava ceremony. Whether you do it in the Milolua Whakalotomua, which is something that I was privileged to have been taught by New Lala, who was taught by some of the Wharewa and La Paha from where you guys are from. They gifted him with that knowledge, and he's gifted me with that. And I see that as the original Kava that Tonga used to do. And we've performed it here in Aotearoa. Sometimes with a bit of controversy because people see it and everyone's expert all of a sudden,
Yeah,
giving lots
everybody.
of
Yeah,
feedback, but that's going
Mm.
to happen.
that's normal.
So that's normal. There's not some.
Mm.
There's nothing that as Tongans we do that there won't be some view out here about halai mea koega mena pembe. But that goes with it, and you just got to brush it
Goes
off.
with the territory. Yep.
Goes with the territory. The thing is the intent behind it. What is the intent? And that kernel of intent behind the cover ceremony is the essence of why Tonga was unique. Yeah? Not the empire, not the fact that we were centralized. It was the fact that we were able to put protocols together that have lasted beyond, time. We are still doing the same cover ceremony, bit of variation here and there from the time of Momo, from the time where that was gifted from Ewiki. That's 1,000 years ago. We're still doing this today. And as a Tongan, that's what I'm proud of. That's what I think as Pacific people, we forget that people are people, religions are religions. They come and go. But what stays is what defines us as the people that we are proud of being. And to me, to see things like our Kava ritual still being done, still being part of, religious ceremonies. Many churches have a Kava before the malanga and so on. It's still a deep part of our culture. It's not gone. The day we don't have the Kava is a day where I believe our culture will die. And that's
Mm.
how powerful the Kava is. And that's what I want to end with. What you're doing with this Kava Talanoa type setting is keeping that spirit alive. And just want to thank you both for the opportunity. Tuloa tupe whare tui mo ha moe ofo. Pe whoki e whare amata pūrika panai halea na i tātau. Ko kore whakamore more atu pe. Ko pota pota ni mui. A whātu.
Malo.
Malo.
Sister Aotearoa.
No, Dora. First, I just want to express my appreciation, Pakilau, Aotearoa Manase Lua. Thank you for your time and accepting to join us. The purpose of this broadcast when to allow um, kind of started it and shared the idea with me is just invite people's different perspectives and share what they want to share, and we get to see and let the people let let the people see and let them take in what they want, and they can see what they want to do with it, and that's all we want to do. This is for educational purposes. Let people share ideas, and I'm grateful that you were able to join us, Pakilau, to share your perspectives and your knowledge and your experiences, because everyone's experience is unique, and everyone's experience is um, unique in a way that it can be a similarity with somebody else. Especially, we're very small people. Like I said, in America, it's not even 1%. In here in New Zealand, at least we can say it's the Polynesian people. We 10%. If you include the Maoris, because I always think the Maoris are Polynesians, but for some reason, since I've been living here, they tend to separate us, but we're Polynesians. There's a good group here, and our boys tend to, because of the smaller population. But places like in America, when it's 0.2%, you know, there's a lot of experiences that we can share in this platform, a digital Kava session, that it can be helpful for some of our brothers and sisters in the other countries that they're in. But I want to appreciate the viewers. We always get a lot of interactions and comments. I always appreciate them
Mhm.
always tuning in and always providing feedback and engagement. It makes the podcast a lot more fun. You could agree, Tua. We have a lot of
100%.
engagements from our people who really just want to know more of our Polynesian history, and and people like Pakilau, Siashi Ilayu, and other other guests that we've invited to learn from them also. But that's for me, Malo.
Malo, Mr. Aotearoa. There's a couple things I want to close with. First, thank you very much to Manase coming to our humble podcast. We joke around, we just tried it. We'll see where it goes. If it goes long, great. If it doesn't go long, at least we stepped into the field and took a shot. So thank you and appreciate your time coming on. I want to close with two thoughts that I think are long lasting from our conversation. Like Taufa'ahau, and this is my interpretation, who seem to understand that you cannot move on to a new idea without embracing the history and the culture that he had, right? He did not totally disengage from his culture and the old practices of his religion. He leveraged that. He took what was good and carried it into the new religion and to the new light that he was in. That is very in tune to what our goals in this podcast are. We as diaspora or even Tongans living in Tonga, we cannot let go of thousands of years of culture and history and think that the future is going to be organized and bright. You let go of that, you are entering pure chaos into the future. But if you leverage the history and the culture, use it to your advantage to navigate the unknown of the future and to add new things, you can build greater things. And obviously faith and the providence of God plays a big deal in that. That's why I believe we are a people of faith, and that's why we've embraced the new religion. The other one is really staying true to how we always close the podcast is stay curious, right? There's a reason why you'll hear multiple versions even of oral history. You could have two people physically see the same event, have them record it immediately, and they will describe sometimes two different things because they're seeing it from their different perspectives, from different angles, and what they assume happened. This is why we don't say, oh, just because oral history is different, that it's wrong. It's not always as accurate or so forth. However, each one needs to be listened to, and then as individuals, we have to navigate it on an individual and on a personal basis. So with that being said, thank you once again, Pakilau. Thank you again, Mr. Aotearoa. And as always, stay curious and don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. Till next time, peace. Malo.
Malo.
Ofat, Malo.
Ovatu.
Ovatu.